Good morning. What great, fantastic, those testimonies that we've heard, that people sharing stuff like that. Amazing, absolutely amazing. Things I've got to follow that. It's the old English teacher in me. I like to talk about characters more than anything else, because like when you do in literature in school, GCSE and so on, you look at the story and then you try and put yourself into the shoes of a character and see what you can learn from them, because they were real people and so on in the Bible sense. And I want to look at character I'm very fond of talking about, and that's David, King David. There's so many layers to David. Now, we're also looking, remember, at this series which is about walking into your destiny. I've called it this, if I've got this thing working, Adam. Wait a minute, we'll try that one. Yeah, nice little picture. This idea of walking into your purpose, finding this thing that is yours. I sold it last month with this idea of picking up a piece of the jigsaw, this thing that God's work that is yours. Now, at the age of 10, roughly 10, God stepped into David's world. And we probably know the story. Quick outline. The prophet Samuel is sent to David's father, a guy called Jesse, to say that one of Jesse's sons is going to be anointed the next king of Israel to succeed Saul. And so Jesse parades all his sons in front of Samuel, starting with the eldest and the most likely. They all go through, and Samuel says, well, it's none of these. And so Jesse has to admit that, well, hang on, it's only little David. He's only 10. He's out there looking after the sheep. So they wheel him in, and Samuel is told by God, well, this is the one. This is the one. And David is anointed at the age of 10, anointed to be the next king of Israel. In other words, at the age of 10, God steps into David's world in a personal way. In a personal way. Now, prior to that, in the first years, we assume that David knew about God. He's from a Jewish family. We assume that he prayed. He knew all this stuff. But at the age of 10, God stepped in and said, it's not about the big thing. It's about you, this bigger thing you are a part of. Now, in that sense, we can all say that. We share that with David. Because at some point, if you're a Christian here this morning, at some point in your life, God stepped into your world in a personal way. Now, whatever your upbringing was prior to that, whether you brought up in a Christian household and you knew all about the things of God, or whether you had no connection with God at all, at some point in your life, God stepped in and made it personal. May not have been at the age of 10. With me, it was a couple of weeks short of my 39th birthday, but it's the same thing. God stepped in and said, you're part of this, and made it personal. Now, that's the similarity. The difference here, of course, is that when God stepped into David's world, he not only stepped into his world and made it personal, he told him his purpose. He gave him his piece of the jigsaw, if you like. He said, you are to be king. Now, the chances are that that didn't actually happen to us. It may have done, but I think it's unlikely. I've not heard many people say that when God became personal to them and they chose to go forward in the meeting or whatever it was, however you connected with God, that God also gave you your purpose. He never said to me in 1988 that I want you to preach, or I want you to go into prison, or I want you to connect with people in recovery, or something like that. He may have done with you, but it's unlikely. The only difference, therefore, is that David knew what his purpose was. He just didn't know when it was going to happen. So that's what I want to look at. I've called this, if you like, walking towards your purpose. The battles that David fought in order to go from that point where God becomes personal to that point where he finds that piece of that jigsaw. Because he doesn't know when it's happened. It's 20 years down the line for David. And there's the difference. That's the theme that we're working on. So at David's... Now we know, by the way, should mention this point, we know that there is a purpose out there for us. We may not know precisely what it is, but we know as we walk on this journey this purpose will come to us. We will enter into that. Well, there's so many scriptures that talk about that one. Things like this. I know the plans I have for you, Jeremiah 29:11. Romans 8:28, people called according to his purpose. Ephesians 2:10, we're his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand. Acts 20:24. Finish my course and the ministry I received from the Lord Jesus. So when God becomes personal to us, we know that there is something there that is ours, that good work. We just don't know what it's going to be. Now, David knew that purpose. So here's the question. What did he do next? What did he do next? At 10 years old, God becomes personal, and he knows his purpose. What did he do next? See, because the next time that we come across David in a significant way, years later, when he slays the Philistine giant Goliath. Story that everybody knows. The 15-year-old David slays a 9-foot-tall Philistine warrior who's terrifying the socks off the rest of Israel's army. Now, that wasn't his purpose. God didn't call him at 10 to kill Goliath. It was a battle that was on the way to that purpose. It was something he needed to overcome on his way to his destiny. So here's the real question. What did David do between the age of 10 and 15 when he faced his first battle? What did he do? I mean, when he was told he was going to be king, did he kind of sit back and say, well, that's it then. That's it then. I'm going to sit with my feet up and wait for people to look after me. I'm not bothering to do anything else. I'm just waiting for this thing to come to me. Is that what we do when we're walking into our purpose? Do we sit back and say, well, I do nothing. I'll just wait until this thing comes towards my life and I pick it up? Or did he train for kingship? Did he study a few books on economics, how to run a kingdom, that sort of thing? No, David did neither of those. You know what David did? The day after he was called to be king, he went out into the fields and looked after sheep. And the next day, he went out in the field and looked after sheep. For the next 5 years, he went out into the fields and looked after sheep. In other words, he got on with his day job. He just got on with life. See, sometimes we can separate the spiritual stuff that we see as Christianity and the real world that we operate in. But David didn't. David, whilst waiting to be king, got on with a day-to-day job, living one day at a time. See, so often we separate the Christian stuff from the real world. And the world sees us that way as well. If you ask people what Christians are like, they'll say, they believe in God and go to church on Sunday. No, they're not. Christians are not people who believe in God and go to church on Sunday. They go to work on Monday as well. And part of the training of being a Christian is not what happens here. It's what happens when you get up tomorrow morning and you go into work. In the light of the fact you have been called by God to be different. The fact that you have to live in a real world that is going in an opposite direction to the way that you're going. You have to live with a new mindset in the real world. See, too often, I think Christians separate this spiritual stuff from the real world. And what happens when we're Christians is what we do here. What we do in this spiritual stuff. But out there in the real world, on a day-to-day job, we used to get up each morning and go out and teach in schools. That's not the Christian bit, but yes it is. David did the ordinary day after day after day. But, and it's a big but, something was different. He didn't just do that. Something happened to David that we need to grasp. Because by the age of 15, this shepherd boy was confronting a 9-foot-tall Philistine giant and killing him with a stone from a sling. So something happened between the age of 10 and the age of 15, whilst David got on with his day job, with his ordinary stuff, that changed him from being a little shepherd boy to a giant killer. Somebody who could face the next test that was coming his way on the way to his destiny. What was that? What changed in David's life in those 5 years? And we can't pin it down, as some people like to do, to some event like Pentecost. There's no suggestion that David had a kind of spiritual awakening, an event, and too many Christians look for that. They'll come forward, oh yeah, my life changed because I came forward at a meeting and somebody laid hands on me and shabba-dabba-dooed all over me, and suddenly I was filled with this power and it all burst into flame. Some people look for these events, the event, the Sunday, where this time something will change. Well, there's no suggestion that happened to David. But something did. David went from shepherd boy to giant killer in 5 years. What happened? Well, for this, I'm indebted, this little insight, if you like, I'm indebted to this fella. I don't have many Christian heroes, but this guy is there. Bill Wilson, founder of Metro World Child. We've heard Adam mention the work this morning. The one that Janine works for, the one that Anna went out last year to see part of, and Adam went out a few weeks ago. Metro World Child, the biggest Sunday school on the planet. And Bill Wilson, if I've got a hero, is my hero. If the Christian world was full of a few more Bill Wilsons, things would change. If they wheeled people like Bill Wilson out on the telly to push the Christian point of view rather than some guy in a purple robe and a dog collar, things would be very, very different. I mean, Bill is astonishing. It's my belief that if Bill preaches anywhere within reach, I'm going to beg Jamie, hire us a minibus or preferably a coach and take everybody down to listen to Bill Wilson, because it should be on every Christian's bucket list to listen to Bill Wilson at least once. You may not like it, but it can change you. Bill's astonishing. I've met Bill a number of times. We've heard him preach a load of times. And we were actually over at Hollybush, interestingly, listening to Bill preach one time. And he was talking about shepherds, about this David thing, about being a shepherd. Now, Bill's got this sort of mind that goes off in funny directions. I like him. He's just crazy. He goes off in funny little directions. So he's there late one night reading about this thing, shepherds, and he's preaching the next day, and he's stopping in a little rural hotel in Yorkshire. And opposite, there's a field full of sheep. And it's midnight. And Bill can't get this thought about what it's like to be a shepherd out of his head. So he thinks, I'm going to find out. So he goes downstairs, gets a chair from the dining room, takes it out of the hotel, climbs over a fence, carefully approaches these sheep, gets about 10 yards away so he doesn't startle them, puts this chair down, sits on this chair, and watches the sheep. Just stares at them. Now, you've got to have met Bill to understand how peculiar this is. I mean, he's a 6-foot-something New Yorker. He's been shot in the back, shot in the head. He's met presidents. He's done all this kind of stuff. And there is this guy sitting in a Yorkshire field on a chair, staring at these sheep. I've looked at this picture. Bill's staring at the sheep. And the sheep are looking back at him. And Bill's looking at the sheep. And the sheep are staring back at him. And this is like midnight. And this staring contest goes on for an hour before the light went on in Bill's thinking. And he kind of got part of this message. And he looked at them in this and he thought, sheep are boring. They are numbingly boring. They don't do anything. They just stare at you. They don't tap dance or do little song and dance routines. They just sit and stare at you. They don't talk to you. They're lousy conversationalists. What sort of day have you had, sheep? Nah. What about Brexit? Nah. They don't do anything. And after an hour of watching these sheep, the light started to go on. And after another hour, the penny dropped. This is what David did. Night after night after night. Stared at these sheep. Might have had a little fire, not a chair. Might have been lying on the ground, not sitting in it. But there he would be, sitting, staring at the sheep. Can't talk to them. Can't go to sleep because you've got to stay alert. You cannot do anything. You sit in the pitch dark all night under the moon and the stars, staring at sheep. And you have no option about what you have to do. You've nobody to talk to. You can't do anything. There are no distractions. There are no phones. There's nothing. You have no option. Only one person you can talk to. The God who flung the stars into space. What David did from the age of 10 to the age of 15 was the ultimate quiet time. The ultimate quiet, and we've heard it from Martin this morning, this falling in love with God, this getting to know a relationship with, he had no option. He couldn't switch off. He had to stay alert. Can't talk to the sheep. He can only connect with God. And for 5 years, David connected with God. Now that quiet time, that ultimate quiet time, and I'm certainly not suggesting that the way you build a relationship with God is by sort of sitting out in the dark for the next 5 years until God talks to you. But we live in a society, we live in a world where quiet time is not popular. It's not sometimes even possible. Where people get very spiritual if they've managed to get up in the morning and spend half an hour. Quiet time, my quiet time, we feel very spiritual about it. Well, David did it for 5 years. 5 years connecting with God. The world in which we live does not like quiet time. It doesn't. How difficult is it to find a little bit of peace and quiet? People can't seem to go from A to B without headphones in, blasting music into their heads. They can't go on a journey without music, without distractions. And don't get me on about mobile phones. My granddaughter came up last week, 12 years old. She's on something called group chat from some of her junior school friends from last year. She was saying how she got up and 1 hour after getting up, having a breakfast, put this on. 248 messages to scroll through on group chat. All these messages that said stuff like, what are you doing? Nothing. I'm bored. So am I bored. What are you having for your breakfast? Meaningless, trivial garbage like that. Banging into your head. And how many people, when they're sitting there with their phone and it goes beep, beep, can resist looking at it? It doesn't matter where you are, in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of church. You can't resist it. You're set up for that. You can't resist it. It doesn't matter. What's that person? Is it life or death? How many times do we get this message coming into our head that really, if you didn't answer it there and then, you actually left it for 20 minutes, will change the course of human history? But it's in there. How little we can grasp hold of peace. I bet David's pleased he hadn't invented mobile phones by then. Perhaps he'd never become king. For 5 years, David connected in the Bill calls this part of his message, by the way, nurtured in solitude, that David's relationship with God, his power, was first of all nurtured in solitude. And that's the thing that we miss. Now, I'm not suggesting that we really need to kind of put people on a guilt trip about quiet times and so on. But what I am saying is backing up what Martin said. That the key to everything here is building that relationship with God. And sometimes that relationship with God needs to be built in solitude, in quiet. Now, we can show that we love God, and we do it a lot in this church by leaping up and down and shouting hallelujah. And I'm not having a go at that, obviously, because David did a fair bit of that. David danced before the Lord. He knew all about praising God vocally and so on, but he also knew about quiet time. He also knew about solitude. I remember when Liz and I moved to the place that we're living out in the country there that people have the barbecue in and so on. The church does that. When we first moved there, we had all the distractions on the other side of the lane where there was a drug dealer who wanted to kill us. And our attention was focused over there. But God kept on saying over and over again, let me sort that out. You just turn and face the other way where the fields are, the woods are, the sky is, and focus on that because I have anointed this place for peace. So don't get distracted on there. And it took us a long time to get that, to turn the other way and let God sort out the drug dealer. 40 days it took to sort him out with members of the church coming up and praying against him. And at the 41st day, he put the house up for sale. And then very quickly after that went. When we handed it over to God, let God deal with all these distractions and focused on the peace, things were much, much better. But it's a struggle. It's not easy to find peace. It's not easy to train ourselves to find peace. It's hard work. But then David had 5 years of it. I don't suppose on that very first night, the day after he'd been told he was going to be king, he had this great long detailed chat with God as a 10-year-old. I bet it took him a while to get into that. I tried it for 10 minutes yesterday, sitting out by our cabin in the field in the rain. I thought, well, I'm not going over there. I'm getting back to the house. I'm going to get soaked if I go over there. So I thought, I'll try this quiet time bit. Sat there and looked at the rain and thought, come on, God, say something. Teach me something. But my head was full of funny little weird thoughts that I couldn't push down. And then I'm looking over here thinking, oh, yeah, the trees are blowing in the wind. Are you teaching me something through that, God? Well, wait a minute. Oh, there's a bit of a puddle over there. Are you teaching me something through that? And I'm sure that God was listening to that saying, why don't you shut up? Why don't you shut up trying to put your spin on it and just sit and be still and know that I am God? And that's what we lack. The importance of that, building that relationship with God, that intimate relationship with God that we've about already. See, Jesus, I think, if I put those scriptures up on this one. Yeah, Jesus knew. Even Jesus did. Luke and Mark's gospel quotes there. Jesus would slip away to the wilderness and pray. Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest. For many were coming and going. They had no leisure, it says, to eat. While it was still dark, he departed and went to a desolate place, and there he prayed. A secluded place. Jesus recognized the value of that solitude, that pulling away and just saying, come on. Just you and me, God. And that's what David did. So finally, when David went down to face Goliath, and he'd not gone down there for that purpose, there was something else that came from his 5 years of quiet time. Because when Saul and the other guys went to him and said, look, you've no chance to get this Philistine giant. You're just a little kid. You're 15 years old. You've no chance. David could remember the times in that quiet time where there'd been action. When the bear came and the lion roared and the wolf appeared. He could remember those occasions when he had to face the challenge. And then the relationship that he'd forged in silence had to be put into action. It had to be tested out. And he reminds Saul of that. David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. David had built that relationship with God in solitude. It had been put to the test when the lion came and God had delivered him. And when the bear came, God... So why is this any different? Why is this any different? See, David had something else as well, that part of another message that Bill Wilson delivered some time ago. He carried a staff. And that staff was not just a walking stick. It was something that he used as a memory prompt. Because when something happened, you'd carve a little notch onto the top of the staff. So when the bear came and David drove it off with the aid of God, he made a little notch on the top of the staff. And when the lion came, he did the same. And now, whenever he carried that staff, his hand rested on the notches that had been made on the top of that staff. Something that would constantly remind him of when God had turned up for him. So when they say, this guy's too big for you, David, resting his hand on those notches, just looks at them and says, no, hang on. When the lion came, God turned up. When the bear came, God turned up. Why is this any different? Let's take him out. He's just a big target. Too big to miss. See, we forget, don't we? We forget the number of times that God turns up into our world and sorts it out. And by the time another problem comes up, another giant appears, we've forgotten what... Israel did the same, didn't they? When they came up to the promised land. And they sent the 12 spies in to spy it all out. 2 come back with positive reports. 10 come back and say, no, it's too big. We can't cope. Well, they'd forgotten. The God who was telling them to go in was the one who parted the Red Sea. Who drowned Pharaoh's army. Who fed them supernaturally in the wilderness. But then when they came to this challenge, no, the people are too big. We forget. We don't keep journals, do we? We forget the number of times that God has turned up into our world and sorted it out. So the next test that comes up, we're struggling. David didn't. See, sometimes we forget. David's relationship, his success at the age of 15 was based upon a relationship he'd nurtured in solitude and the times when God had turned up for him. But that's not the end for David. There were more battles to come. David fought a number of battles, including this. The battle of success. Not the battle for success. The battle of success. Success brings problems. David's killing of Goliath made him a celebrity. People were singing songs about him. And that wasn't good in itself because it brought in envy. Saul turned against him. Success is a tough thing to have. It's all very well saying, yeah, I'd like to be a pastor of a church, but you become one. And they'll start queuing up behind it to stab you in the back and to gossip about you. It's hard work. Success is a problem. And if it's not a problem from people outside, it can be a problem in here because pride kicks in. We've seen so many guys in recovery do that. They've come out of recovery, they've been very humble, they've got God on their side, they've got cleaned, and then they've got involved in something, set something up, it's become successful, and now they're more keen on the photographs and the publicity and the money. Success is a problem. We have to deal with it when things are going well. David had to deal with that. He also had to deal with the battle of circumstances. Circumstances change. It's not all easy. David had to face that. When Saul's after him, he goes on the run. At one point, hiding from Saul's men, he has to hide in a city called Gath. And then discovers in this city that people were trying to kill him there as well. So now he's got to get out the city, and the only way he can think of getting out is by pretending to be insane. And the Bible tells us what he did. He has to dribble, sit there in a corner dribbling, and making weird noises and scratching on the doorpost. Can you imagine that? Making people think you're an absolute idiot, so they'll think you're no threat and throw you out, when you knew that all this was an act. Can you imagine the humiliation you'd feel? And then when eventually he got thrown out of the city, he takes refuge in a cave called the Cave of Adullam. And he's there on his own, frightened about people trying to kill him. You ever felt, wait, what's happening, God? I thought you said I was going to be king. I thought you said everything was going to be good. And now look at me. I'm alone, living in a cave with people hunting me down to try and kill. Circumstances change. David had to deal with that. He also had to deal with the battle to stay pure. Even after he achieved his purpose and become king, he had to fight that battle, and he lost that a number of times too. Lustful attitudes towards a married woman, sending her husband out into the front line of the battle so he'd get killed and he can marry her. I mean, David fights this battle to stay pure, to stay on course. It's changing circumstances, pride, and those are battles that we all fight. We don't fight them in that order. We fight them. They come at us. It's what Celebrate Recovery in many ways is about. We're dealing with people who battle to stay pure, who battle to cope with circumstances, to deal with stuff. It's what it's about. We all fight those battles, and we all need that stuff. But of course, at the top of the list is the battle of the mind. The battle that David fought in solitude to build that relationship with God. Because once you build that, once you have that in place, it gives you the strength to carry you through the rest. And that's where David went. 5 years building that relationship with God gave him the strength, not to win the battles every time, he lost a number of them, but to give him the strength to see him through. I can't stress more than's been said already this morning, how important it is to build that relationship with God above everything else. To build that relationship with God, to fall in love with God, to fall in love with Jesus. To give us the strength, if you like, to say what David said when he wrote Psalm 57. And at this point, he's in the Cave of Adullam. He's on his own. People trying to kill him. Memory of being humiliated is fresh in his mind. And he writes this: I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell amongst ravenous beasts, men whose teeth and spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above all the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. And look how he finishes that. And bear in mind his circumstances. Alone, humiliated, people lurking outside who want to kill him. But he finishes this: my heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. I'll make a music. Awake, my soul, awake, harp and lyre. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. Come on, wow. If you look at David's circumstances, when he wrote that, You see the importance of that relationship that he built with God in the solitude, in the sheep watching. That's our task. That's the advice. Build that relationship. Build it, build it, build it. Go deeper, deeper, deeper. It will give you the strength to win all the rest of the battles as we go on that journey to find our purpose. Sounds simple. Of course it's not. It requires effort. It requires commitment. And it requires a heart that really wants to serve God. That's it. Not gone too far over, despite starting late. Right? God bless you, folks. We'll leave it on that point.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's been an amazing morning. The Lord has spoken to us through one another, has spoken to us through worship. And I think the word that comes back to my mind about this whole morning is intimacy. The Lord wants intimacy with us. He knows why we need it, but the fact that he wants it with us is the overwhelming fact. He wants us to go away and spend that time. And like Alan said, I've done the exact same. I've sat there and thought, Lord, speak to me. But sometimes it's not that. It's just being still and knowing he is God. Knowing that he is there throughout all of our circumstances. And that's hard because it's easy to say and sometimes hard to believe. But knowing that, we need to remind each other. It's why we need one another, to remind each other that he is with you and to be still and know that he is our God. So I'm just going to end in prayer, and then we're going to share some fellowship together and like the love of the Lord. Oh, come on. Lord, I just thank you. I think the only words that can come out my mouth is thank you. Lord, for the graduation, Lord, I can personally say what an amazing honour it has been to be a Nazarite, but for what you're doing, Lord, in this year, Lord, we've not even started properly yet our year of reaping, Lord, but you are saying and you are showing so many amazing things. So, Lord, I thank you that we are a family, that we've been able to experience this together. We've been able to experience this as a family. And Lord, the word family wants to keep pouring out my mouth because we are. Sunday morning isn't just a time where, in the week where we worship you. It's a time where we come together as a family and worship you. So Lord, I thank you for the intimacy you want to share with us. With us, Lord. With us. So Lord, I pray, let us walk away knowing you more from what Allan has shared. Walk away sharing with one another what has blessed us this morning. And walk away saying, Lord, thank you. Amen.